Hey, this is Mike Robbins. Thanks so much for joining me for this episode of the podcast. This is episode 350 of the We're All in This Together podcast. And Happy New Year. It's January 3rd as I'm recording this. This will probably go live on our podcast feed later today. I'm also actually recording today live on Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, something I haven't done in I think over a year. I was looking back at our Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube lives, and I think the last one was December of 2022. So, hello, if you're joining that way, always good to connect with everybody. Today, in addition to wishing you a happy new year, whenever you may be listening to this, I hope things are going well in your world for you and your family and your team. I want to talk about this concept called putting down our sword. Now, I was reminded of this concept recently when I was listening to an episode of the Mel Robbins podcast, which I'm a big fan of. Mel and I are not related, even though we have the same last name and the same first initial. We actually have the same publisher as well and have a bunch of friends in common, but don't even know each other. I'm a big fan of her work and her books and her TED Talk. And if you're not familiar with Mel Robbins, I highly recommend her podcast and checking her out on social media. She is fantastic. But she talked about this concept in a recent podcast episode when she was kind of doing a recap of the year of putting down the sword. And ever since I heard that last week when I was listening to it, I've been thinking about that and how relevant that is in my life right now. Maybe it's relevant in your life as well. But this idea of not everything's a fight, not everything has to have a sort of amp up or hunker down, or and again, this can manifest itself in a lot of different ways. Even look, I love this time of year. I love the end of the year when we wrap up the previous year and the beginning of the new year. Again, maybe you're listening to this right at the beginning of January as I'm recording it and posting it. Maybe you're listening to this or watching the video of this many months later. But as I think about goals and intentions and what I want to create, what you want to create, what we all want to create for the new year, I notice sometimes even with that positive, hopeful idea, I can take a position or a stance that's kind of like a fight, or I got to bring my sword. I was even thinking about this, I don't use the word slay very often, but that's kind of a word that a lot of people use, that like we're crushing it, we're slaying it. I mean, some of the language that we use is really interesting when you think about it. Like, what are we slaying? We're slaying dragons? Like, I don't even understand that. We're crushing what? What are we crushing? We're trying to accomplish something. We're trying to, right? So there's a lot of language in our society. I think about this from the world of sports where I came from for many years. I think about this when I'm in, speaking to leaders and teams and lots of businesses, and, we're going to crush our goals. We're going to crush the competition. It's like, again, I love to win. I love to be successful. I love to support other people to be successful. But really, is it necessary for us to use that kind of language or to think of things as a constant fight? What if we could just put the sword down? I mean, think about politics, right? I mean, again, not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but here we are entering a presidential election here in the US. It's going to get, I mean, things are already incredibly tense and divided and divisive, and uh, on social media, in families. We just got through the holidays. Maybe you went to Thanksgiving or to Christmas and you're with your in-laws or your relatives and you disagree politically. Look, as we get closer to any presidential election, but especially the last few over the last decade or two, the level of intensity, the level of divisiveness that exists, on cable TV that we watch, on social media that we engage ourselves in. There's so much fighting happening and people bringing swords to conversations about all kinds of stuff, health and education and economics and, safety and security and guns and peace and abortion and all the things, right? Again, I'm not saying for us to water down our opinions. I'm not saying for us not to speak up and speak our minds. And I'm actually okay with healthy debate, discussion. I mean, I often say when I'm working with teams, like, if there's no conflict on your team, there's no conflict that's existing. Like, people are lying. There's either tension or conflict within most groups. And the less conflict there is, the more tension there is. The more we learn how to engage and embrace healthy conflict, the better off. So putting down our sword isn't about not having conflict, isn't about avoiding difficult conversations. It's really about our mindset and our posture. Again, most people who know me or work with me, I mean, I- I'm a pretty nice guy. I'm a pretty easygoing guy, at least on a certain level. I mean, if you know me really, really well, like if you're married to me or I'm your dad, or we're in real close proximity with each other in a friendship or business relationship, um, you will pick up a deeper level of my intensity. And at times, the people who know me really, really well, and if I'm being really honest, I have a tendency to relate to life as a fight. And I'm not someone who's running around picking fights and yelling at people but constantly, and look, there's a whole sort of deeper psychological layer of this, much of which I've been working on for a long time, but like assuming something bad might happen, assuming people might be untrustworthy, whatever the case may be, being skeptical or paranoid about stuff. Again, I've worked on this a lot in my life, and it's a lot better in a lot of ways today than it was many years ago. But based on how I grew up and how I was raised and sort of how I'm wired, and for a whole bunch of reasons, not to justify it, but if I'm not mindful and conscious, I can operate in life on a daily basis in my car, in my office here, on my computer, out in the world doing things as if I've got to be on guard and watch my back all the time. And while I have compassion for myself and empathy and understanding for where this comes from, I also know it doesn't serve me. It really doesn't serve me. I've talked about this before on the show, the level of vigilance sometimes, the level of just, right? And I think about an example that I sometimes use. Maybe I've shared it here on the show, but I sometimes share this when I'm speaking. But I think sometimes our fight, our bringing the sword, if you will, to the meeting, to the conversation, to the family dinner, to whatever, we think we're doing it in reaction to others. And look, maybe we are to some degree, but we don't often own the way that we generate that ourselves. And here's what I mean by this. So this example that I use, back when I was growing up and playing baseball and basketball in Oakland and really involved in sports, I would work in the summertime. I worked for the Oakland Park and Rec, which I loved. It was fun. I worked with kids. I coached. I, did some stuff that was cool. And I worked at a rec center called Redwood Heights and another rec center called at Montclair Park. And anyway, it was great. And one of the things that would happen sometimes when we give the kids free time, free play, let them just go, play in the sandbox or in the swing on the swings or whatever. We weren't doing some organized activity. What would sometimes happen is the kids would start messing around and then they'd start chasing each other. And I'd inevitably have some kid run up to me and they'd say, Coach Mike, he's chasing me, or something, right? Upset that this one kid was chasing another kid or whatever. And what I would often ask is, do you want to play chase? And usually they'd look at me silly, like, what do you mean? No, that's why I'm coming to sort of tattle on them, because I don't want to play chase and they're bugging me. And then I'd say, if you don't want to play chase, stop running. And I'm staring at a, 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old, 9-year-old kid, and they're looking at me kind of sideways, like, stop running. Just go sit on the bench or go on the swings or sit in the sandbox or just stop running, because I know it looks like the chaser is the one in charge of this game, but actually it's the chasee. The game of chase gets really boring if you stop running. And I think of that as a metaphor in life. We're often complaining about people and circumstances, situations in our lives. And again, there are things that happen that are stressful, but we don't realize, oh, I keep running. And then I'm blaming the chaser, when in reality, I'm perpetuating a lot of this. I keep bringing the sword and wondering why people are defensive with me, or things they're starting to spiral and go sideways, right? This happens in our families. This happens in our teams. This happens at work. This happens with our personal goals and how we relate to ourselves. So if we can shift that relationship, if we can put the sword down, it doesn't mean we don't speak up. It doesn't mean we're not engaged. It doesn't mean we're not passionate. And look, let's be honest. There are times in life when it's important to really stand up for ourselves. And quite frankly, even times in life when it's important to fight. And I don't mean fight like, swinging at people, but you know what I mean? Like, really, no, like having healthy boundaries, saying, no, that doesn't work for me, or I'm not interested in this conversation or whatever. Right. I talk a lot in my work about the importance of embracing sweaty palm conversations. So I'm not in any way saying don't speak up, don't engage, don't debate and discuss, don't have that healthy and important conflict that's necessary. But what I am saying is we don't have to keep bringing a sword everywhere we go. Brene Brown talks about armoring up, right? And think about that. We put on our armor, we grab our shield, and it's like, no one's gonna mess with me. I'm gonna right, which I understand, and I do a lot of that. I've done a lot of that in my life. I'm very familiar with the concept, and I understand the impulse why we do it. It just doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve us. It doesn't serve our relationships. Another example that I often use, I was just talking about this on a Zoom call earlier this morning, is when you're sitting in traffic and it's bumper to bumper and you're on the freeway and someone's trying to merge in. If you don't want to let them merge in, what do? You don't look at them, right? Because the moment you look at them, unless they're like screaming at you or flipping you off, you're going to let them in, right? Because you're going to connect with that other human being, human to human. You don't know that person in the other car. You're never going to talk to them. You probably will never see them again the rest of your life. But as soon as you make that human connection with the other person, you realize, oh, man, it sucks when I'm the person out there and no one's letting me in, right? So in that moment, we put the sword down, so to speak. Okay, go ahead. And we let the person go. Now, look, we don't usually let 20 people go. We let one person go, and hopefully they give us a little wave, and there's like, all right. And then we keep going. And if it happens again, maybe we let another person in. But you know what I mean? That's a very practical and then sort of silly example of putting the sword down. Now, again, you could choose, I'm not looking, I'm going to stay angry, and people start honking and screaming, and you just stay focused on the road. And again, you got to know yourself and know the situations and know the people around you. But I think you and I armor up and bring these swords all the time when they just don't serve us. They end up perpetuating. I mean, think about this if you have children of any age. We've got teenagers in our house, right? 17 and 15. And I notice that I can have a tendency to bring a sword with me, metaphorically, obviously, into conversations with our teenagers. And really what it is, if I'm being honest, usually the impulse for me to bring the sword is completely fear-based. I'm afraid I'm going to get taken advantage of. Someone's not going to be paying attention to me. My voice isn't going to be heard. I'm going to have to advocate for myself because whatever. And maybe there's some validity to that, or I have some, examples of or experience with that I can use. But a lot of times it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If I bring the sword with me, I'm probably going to use it. And that's going to perpetuate other people to do the same. Now, again, you might be thinking to yourself, well, Mike, you don't know the people I work with, or you don't know the people in my family or my in-laws or my boss or whatever. You don't understand the difficult environment I find myself in. And if I'm too soft, I'll get knocked over. And look, I don't know all the specifics of your life and your family and your team and your work. I get it. And again, there is a certain healthy level of paying attention to things, being mindful of things, right? Like, it's not paranoid to put your seatbelt on in the car when you get in the car. It's smart. It's safe. It's not paranoid to buy life insurance, right? Those things, again, I'm just using those as examples. There's things we do to protect ourselves that are necessary, that are healthy. It's just we've got to check in and really tell the truth. So what can we do? What can you do? What can I do? What can we do as we think about this to put our swords down in ways that are more conducive to collaboration, connection, trust, fulfillment, success? There's 5 things I want to share with you that you can do, that I can do, that we can all do. The first thing that we got to do that's really important as it relates to this is check in with ourselves. Pay attention, take a breath, listen to ourselves. Where am I coming from? Where we come from has a lot to do ultimately with the outcome of the conversation, even the goal, the aspiration, right? As you're thinking about, again, if you're listening to this right as I'm recording it and posting it at the beginning of the year, if you're thinking about your goals and your intentions for the new year, where are they coming from? Are they coming from a hopeful, excited place of possibility, of positive intention, or are they coming from a shame-based, there's something wrong with me, or I screwed this up in the past, or I'm a loser if I don't do this, or no one's going to love, you know what I mean? Again, it's subtle, but the same activity, I've used this example for years, you and I could go for a run or go to a yoga class or go to the gym or do something, right? Which we all know physical activity is a healthy thing to do and important for our well-being and longevity and all the things, right? But what's the motivation for the exercise? Am I doing it because I love myself and I love my body and I want to be well and I want to take care of myself and be healthy and fit, or am I doing it because I'm afraid if I don't, I'll be out of shape and people won't love me and I'll feel bad about myself right? It's subtle, but it's different. Is it coming from a place of shame or is it coming from a place of love? The same is true when I go into conversations, when I think about engaging with someone in my family or someone on my team or talking about an idea, a project, right? Even if I'm scared that the person might not agree or it might be a difficult conversation, what's my intention? Where am I coming from? Where am I at? Am I walking into that meeting or that conversation or getting on Zoom with a big sword behind my back, armored up? Again, just tell the truth. If that's the case, it's not inherently evil. It's just like, okay, that's probably going to precipitate a certain outcome or at least create the context for a certain outcome to be more likely. So we got to first just check in with ourselves and tell the truth. The second thing we can do now, look, this is a cliche, but a lot of cliches are cliches because they're true. Just because you've heard them a lot doesn't necessarily take away the wisdom or the value of them. But the second thing that's important for us to do is assume positive intent. Assume positive intent. So much of what happens is, in the case of, um, the things that are important to us, often is we assume negative intent. We assume that the people around us, um, are trying to get something from us or trying to do something or trying to mess with us in some way, or, why'd they say that? That can have all kinds of impact on us personally, on the people around us, right? So if we assume positive intent, what we ultimately then are able to do is shift our perspective, shift our mindset, shift where we're coming from, if you will. The assuming of negative intent puts us in that crouch, puts us in that place of, I got to bring the sword because if I don't, they're going to mess with me. They're going to take advantage of me. Again, I'm not talking about being naive, but I am talking about actually paying attention to ourselves and what's our intention, but also what's my assumption going into the conversation. Now, look, if we've had difficulty with this person or this situation before, it may be harder to assume positive intent, but we can definitely do it. And it's up to us, right? The third thing we can do is focus on what we want. Oftentimes, and I catch myself doing this, is we're talking about the problem, we're talking about the issue, we're talking about what's not working. And again, sometimes that needs to be addressed. But what is it that we want? What's our intention? What's our positive intention? What's our desire in the conversation, with the goal, with the meeting, with the project, with the thing? Like, focus on that. Now, maybe the other person doesn't agree and maybe they're not on board with it. But if we spend a lot of time and energy focused on the thing that we're afraid of or angry about or don't want or is not working, not that we want to sugarcoat that, but that doesn't get us to ultimately where we want to go. Another thing that we can do that's really important, this is the fourth thing, is seek common ground and see if we can collaborate for a win-win if possible. Now, some situations don't lend themselves all that nicely to win-wins. It's kind of an either or thing, but oftentimes there's more common ground than we realize. There's more empathy, there's more potential to collaborate. And even if it goes one way or the other, it goes our way or it goes their way, so to speak, we still can go about that discussion in a collaborative way so that the next time we have to have a conversation like that, we're not thinking, I got to bring a bigger sword. You know what I mean? So think about the moment and what we're focused on, but also think about the relationship and the future. And so much of that is about finding common ground and seeing if there is a way to collaborate and even find a win-win. And then the final thing is, the fifth thing is, be willing to be vulnerable. Be willing to be vulnerable, right? Brene Brown defines vulnerability as risk, emotional exposure, and uncertainty. Oftentimes, the reason why we bring the sword is because there's risk or there's uncertainty. So we think that the sword somehow creates the certainty. It doesn't. Or the safety. It doesn't. But one of the things that we can do is be willing to be emotionally exposed in the conversation or with ourselves or with other people, whatever the case may be. Now, look, this is not easy, and especially with certain people. And if we're feeling scared or we're feeling like we've been hurt before, but oftentimes, if we can start by lowering the waterline on the iceberg, as I like to say, being real about how we actually feel, makes a huge difference, right? The natural human response to vulnerability is empathy. So, can we be vulnerable in service of connecting with the people around us, in service of connecting with ourselves, in service of getting clear and being honest about what's really true for us, as opposed to simply just bringing the sword to try to win the fight, to try to get the thing, to try, right? It's just a very different energy. It's risk. It's soft, if you will, but soft, not like weak, but soft, like open. And there's so much possibility that exists when we're willing to come from that vulnerable place. So those are the 5 things, right? Check in with ourselves, assume positive intent of the other person, but even of ourselves, right? Focus on what we actually want. That's the 3rd thing. The 4th thing is to find common ground and see if we can collaboratively come up with a win-win. And then the 5th thing is be vulnerable. All of these things, if we do any one of them, it's going to help remind us to put the sword down. But if we really start by telling the truth with ourselves and noticing, gosh, I bring swords a lot of places that it's just not necessary. No one's really out to get me. I don't have to protect myself. There's no lion or tiger or bear coming at me. I'll be okay. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for watching here. If you were watching this on YouTube or LinkedIn or Facebook, good to see you again. I'm going to try to do some more lives like this throughout the year, as well as some videos on our YouTube channel. Subscribe to that if you haven't already. Make sure you follow me. If you're watching this video, you obviously already do follow me on one of the social platforms of LinkedIn, Facebook, or YouTube. But you can check out all my work and find out more about me at mike-robbins.com. Until next time, I look forward to seeing you again soon, and I'm wishing you all the best for a happy new year, and I'll talk to you again real soon.